Okay, so I'm gonna need everyone to promise they won't do anything evil with what I'm about to show you how to do. And so today we're gonna be doing WebSockets and augmented reality. And the main thing that comes up with this is that you can take a bunch of information from an AR scene and transmit it somewhere else. And so you should be really careful in making sure that you get permission to do this before you do it, because it is really, really not cool if you don't ask for permission before taking kind of the kinematic of a phone outside of that situation. So like people expect the AR information on their phone to stay on their phone. They don't expect you to move it somewhere else. And so I just want to be very clear that that is something that you shouldn't, like, you should, if you're doing some sort of game with AR and you're sending kinematic information around, you should be very careful. And so, yeah, that's just something I wanted to start with. But on with what we're doing. So here we have an AR scene that is transmitting to a separate phone using a WebSocket. And so any sort of movement on the cell phone's behalf will get translated into a movement in the red box. So the red box on the right will represent what is the phone's position and orientation. So we also have it set up so that the sliders on the right will move the green box in both scenes. And so this can be really useful if you want to create some sort of game. Like WebSockets are really useful for creating AR games. And then they also have a bunch of other features that you can do. So this is a really unique place to explore because you can send kinematic information like where a phone is pointed or what its orientation is, or kind of like whether it's high or low. And you can send that across to somewhere else. And that can even be into another AR scene. And so this is how you can kind of start getting shared reality type stuff and things like that. It can also be really helpful for troubleshooting and also seeing how other people are using your apps. So, but you should make sure that you ask for permission if you are doing that. But it could give you an idea of what the user experience is like and how people are moving their phones in an experience. But once again, ask them first. So today we're going to focus on using WebSockets in augmented reality. And to do that, you need some sort of server to do all of the networking with the WebSockets. And so you can have the server be the same server that is serving the web page. And so we are going to be using Django for that purpose as an application server. So we'll have Nginx, Django, that whole pipeline. I don't want to go into a whole detailed tutorial on it. So I'll just link some DigitalOcean kind of overviews of how you can set this type of server up. You don't need to use DigitalOcean. I just think they have some really good tutorial pages. So these are really helpful ways of getting you up to speed for that. And if you can get the Django server set up, in particular, we want to update a library and use Django Channels. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can implement WebSockets, but I think Django Channels is really good for experimentation because it allows you to do some really silly things. And a lot of other WebSocket libraries tend to be a lot more verbose, and they don't have kind of built-in broadcasting and channels and things like that where you can start doing silly things really quickly. But the one thing with Django Channels is I haven't actually seen it used in production to a high degree. So it might not be good for if you're doing something with production, but it is really good for experimentation. And if you have a low number of sockets, it works great. So, and it's also just really quick. So you can get things up and running very easily. And it's just my favorite WebSocket server. I think Node is also competitive when it comes to WebSockets. So that would be the other suggestion that I would look into if you need another application server. So compared to HTML, which is a little bit more like mail where you send something and then you expect something back, WebSockets are a lot more like telephones where you have some sort of initial connection. Once that connection goes through, messages can get sent back and forth very rapidly. And so with the things that we're going to be sending back and forth in this example, from the AR scene, we're going to be taking the kinematic information. We're going to be sending it every single frame or every single time we get that kinematic information across onto the WebSocket. And the thing that's really cool about how quick these things are is you actually can get most of the information across. And then on the other side, we will be receiving that information and then using it to plot out where that object is. So there's an on receive function as well. And then we have kind of the inverse happening where we have sending events happening when we move the sliders, and that will be received on the other side. So to keep an eye on the code, when we move on to that, there'll be an on send and a send event, and there'll be some sort of connection process. And that'll happen on both of the clients, and it'll also happen on the server. So for the JavaScript component, the scenes are basically either the basic AR scenes that we've been creating or the basic 3JS scenes. But the one part that's a little bit different is the connection to the WebSocket. So we have it set up so that you have to write in a name and then click a button. And so when the button gets clicked, we'll just hide all that extra information. And then we have to initialize the WebSocket. And so when you're using WebSockets, it's helpful to use some libraries to make a few things easier. So one thing that comes up is that if your server is any sort of, like, if it's not a high performance performance server, it's really likely that it won't respond to a few requests every now and then, which will break a WebSocket. So if you want your WebSocket to stay connected, one of the strategies is to set a reconnect function every so often, so that if it does get disconnected, it will retry again and again. And the other thing that you want with these reconnects is you really do want there to be some sort of maximum timeout or some sort of timeout function in general, because if this number is too low and you have some sort of issue with your server and you have all of your clients that are reconnecting with the server, you can end up accidentally DDoS attacking yourself, where your server will go out, all the clients will start trying to ask for a connection again, and then when your server does come back online, it has so many people trying to get connections with it that it can't come back online. So it's actually important to make sure that you have some sort of strategy for these kind of outages, and that's actually something that it can be a really small hiccup on the server and it can end up causing you a lot of trouble. So just using some sort of reconnect WebSocket, I think, is really helpful when you're doing WebSockets. And then you have two different functions that you can call with the WebSocket: on message and then a send function. So sending, you tend to send JSON, and on message, you tend to read out the JSON, and the JSON is in the data function. So then you just parse it out, and then you can do whatever you want with that information. So on the Django channel side of things, we have to create a WebSocket consumer. And so we'll create two of these, one for the desktop and one for the mobile. So we have the one that's sending the information from the AR scene, and then the one that is sending back information from the 3JS scene. And so we'll just focus on the mobile right now. So basically you have a connection function and a disconnection function. And so in the connection function, when we write that up, we basically just have the values that need to be accepted for it. And so in particular with routing, we have to capture the channel name. And then we do a group add where we add the WebSocket that we've just created to a channel, and that'll allow it to communicate with other devices on that channel. And then when we are doing the disconnect function, we just disconnect it from that same channel. For the information being sent across, we're just going to send simple text information across. One thing that I do want to emphasize is that if you are doing something that's exposed to people that you don't know, you really want to make sure that you have some sort of cleaning up function here. So some sort of function that will make sure that in this text, there's no JavaScript that can execute, or there's no kind of dangerous code. And so this would be where you would put the sanitation step. The other thing to pay attention to is on the first step with the connection and disconnection, you actually can do authentication here. So maybe you don't want everyone to be able to touch these WebSockets. And so that's something that Django Channels can do pretty well. But for right now, we are going to be doing some kind of unsafe WebSocket programming because we are just doing this for ourselves. And ideally, no one else will even know about these WebSockets. So even though they are kind of exposed to the internet, we're kind of using the obscurity aspect. And yeah. And there you have it. That's all there is to it. So I wanted to kind of do some extra stuff with pendulums in a little bit. And there's kind of some other ideas that I have floating around with using this. Yeah, I'm kind of excited to do some more advanced projects. There are some things that some extra work that you have to do when doing combined AR scenes, because you need to be able to you need to find the transformations from one scene to another scene if you are doing kind of shared reality stuff. So there's a few extra steps to get there. And so I might work towards that. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is for today. Thank you. Have a good day.